You know, I joke when I leave the house, it's good for my wife's boyfriend.
Are you gone for the whole week?
No. This is a week where he could be in the house with me and I wouldn't notice him.
Okay, buckle up, everybody. This will be a long one. Welcome to 32 Thoughts, the podcast, presented as always by the GMC Sierra, Jeff Marek, Elliotte Friedman, and Dom Sramaty, who Elliotte, by the way, is playing hurt. Never play injured, but he can always play hurt, a little under the weather, but he's going to soldier through all of this. And I always preface these shows by saying, as Bart Simpson once said, we'll try to keep it brief. We are going to go through all 32 teams in advance of the trade deadline.
What did Homer Simpson say to that?
What's that?
What's the valuable lesson? Never try.
That's right. Can't wait.
You
Don't
have
try.
doomed us to failure.
Okay, very good. I want to get right to it here. So this is going to be the gist that you've heard these shows before that we do. Usually we do them around free agency. We do them around trade deadline as well. So here it is. We're going to go through each division. We're going to get to the Montana's thought line as well. But Elliotte, we will start first. We'll sort of just go alphabetically through all the teams, the buyers, the sellers, the in-betweeners, if you will. We'll start in the Pacific, and we'll start with a seller, the Anaheim Ducks.
So one of the names that a lot of people are wondering about is Frank Vatrano. And definitely teams have looked into him, and I've been told the price is very high. One thing about Pat Verbeek is that last year when Adam Henrique had a year left on his contract, he set the price high and felt that if he wanted to, he could wait and do it this year. And he's got the same approach with Vatrano. One of the things that's happened here in Anaheim is they're so young and they're rebuilding that Verbeek thinks it's very important that there are good pros in the group there. You know, they're about to trade Henrique. I'd be surprised if he was there. They went out and they signed Killorn, and they went out and they signed Gudas. I've heard that there have been teams that have kind of asked a little bit about Gudas. Would Anaheim consider doing that? And I'm under the impression the Ducks are saying, no way. We're simply not doing it. There's a limit to the amount of kids you can have. You need good pros. And Vatrano is on that list. So I think if he gets traded, we're going to look at the return and we're going to understand why he gets moved. It's going to be big. So that's the way I kind of approach that. I'm expecting Henrique to move. There's been a bunch of interest around him. He's playing Sunday night against Vancouver. They didn't pull him from the lineup. I know there's been some interest around Sam Carrick. I've heard, but I don't know for sure, that some teams have wondered about if they'll be able to extend with these guys, if the Ducks will allow that. And I'm also under the impression that John Gibson is probably not going now, that if he's going in the off season. I'll say something else about the Ducks. There have been some rumors that they are going to, I still think this is a long process and a long rebuild, but someone did say to me, don't be surprised if they continue to add some of these veterans. They've got a ton of kids in their organization. They're going to add more in the offseason with their draft and a high pick, obviously. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if Verbeek continues to add good vets. And I should mention Zegras too. It's a really tough one because I do think teams try. The one thing I think Verbeek is smart with here is that he's talented, and whatever concerns you may have about whether or not he lines up with the way you see the game, it's hard to replace talent. And I do believe Verbeek looks at it like, unless we get an offer that we really like here, because I do think they've told teams who've asked, you don't have enough of what we want to do this. I do think unless they get that, they're going to give Zegras the chance to prove that he can or can't do what they're asking him to do, which I believe includes bulking up and showing a two-way commitment.
All right. So eyeballs on Anaheim as sellers. Speaking of which, even though they keep on winning and had a really impressive win Saturday on Hockey Night in Canada and a great Mika Kiprusoff night, what about the Calgary Flames? We've seen Toffoli go, Zadorov go, Lindholm go, last week Tanev, soon to be Hanifin. We know all about the Jacob Markstrom drama as well and how he feels about how this process has played itself out. Where are you at on Calgary, Elliotte?
Well, first of all, it should be mentioned, I thought they had a great ceremony on Saturday night. I thought it was extremely well done. I mean, of all the players who've had their numbers retired in recent years, is there any one of them that we really knew less about than Kiprusoff? Jágr liked his privacy, but he was always out there. And nobody was more out there and knew more people than Chris Chelios. Their speeches were great. Their nights were great. And there was more we learned, but there was always a real connection between Jágr and the fans and Chelios and the fans. And not that there wasn't a connection between Kiprusoff and the fans, but the thing is they just really didn't know him. That's probably the most that anyone ever heard him speak. And it was a really good ceremony, and the after hours with Scott and Ryan Leslie and those guys was tremendous. It was just a really, really nice night. Now, one thing I do know is I know the Flames were very unhappy with the timing of the Markstrom thing and the comments and you know I mean believe me, so some people were unhappy with me and I get it. That's fine. It's that time of the year and it's emotional. And you know, another owner said to me, we were talking on Saturday morning and we were talking about that, and they didn't like the timing of that for Calgary because they're like, those weekends are so important to your team. You hate it when something dumps on them, but such is life. It's the week before the trade deadline, and that can happen. They won 5 in a row. It was an incredible win on Saturday night. Markstrom continues to play great. Kadri's been fantastic. You know, Huberdeau, one thing about Huberdeau is if you watch that goal by Kadri, he makes an incredible play on the defenseman right in front of the Pittsburgh net. He makes it, I can't remember who the defenseman was, but he makes it so that defender can't get their stick in Kadri. And it's not even really interference or anything like that. It's just a really smart play. You know, the kids are going, you know, Pospisil was a menace all over the ice. You know, we said it and someone agreed to me with it. They said if Calgary had everybody they started the year with and everyone stayed, they could be a real nightmare in the first round. Like, you would not want to see Markstrom in the first round the way he's playing, and you would not want to see a top D pair of Hanifin and Tanev in the first round. But you know, this is where we're going here. Markstrom, his issue, on one hand, he's upset because it's not the same team he signed with. But on the other hand, I think he's more upset because he feels that he should never have been told he could be traded to New Jersey. I think that's what this is all about. If it wasn't going to happen, then he feels he shouldn't have even been told about it, and he didn't want to know about it. And, you know, as Kevin said in the intermission on Saturday night, when he played with Markstrom, he was a single guy. And when you're single, like every parent who's listening to this, you know, when you're single and it's just you're like, la-da-da, I have no responsibilities. I'll do whatever I feel like. And then when you have a partner or you're married and you have children, you're sitting there and you're saying, oh my God, I can't be completely irresponsible. I actually have to consider other people with my actions. And I just don't think he liked that. I don't think he liked the stress. By the way, I'll also say this. I know a lot of people, including myself, have believed the deal fell apart over retention or what Calgary considered the proper price for retention. On Saturday, someone else said to me that they heard that it wasn't even that so much as Calgary just saw how Markstrom was going and how the team was starting to go. And they just said, look, we could make the playoffs and we're not doing this. So there's a second reason that this may have fallen apart. Whatever the case, Markstrom's upset about it. We'll see what that means over the next week. Now that the event is over with Kiprusoff, they'll really have to sit down and figure out how they want to approach this. And, Hanifin, like we said on Friday's pod, they made an offer to re-sign Tanev. He just said, you know what, we've gone too far along the way. Let's go and let's get this done. As of Sunday, when we tape this, Hanifin is still focused on teams he wants to sign with. And I think the Flames are too. Number one on that list, and nobody has told me I'm wrong about this, is Tampa Bay. And I believe the Lightning would like to do it. When that happens, it tells me that there's a deal to be made contract-wise. There just hasn't been a deal to be made trade-wise. And as I said on Saturday, if it was that easy to do, it would be done already. And what we don't know here is what happens if they can't get this done. Does Hanifin open up his list of teams, or he has a partial no trade too? Or does Calgary get to the point where they simply say, look, we're going to do what we think is best, and we're going to make that deal? But it's amazing. Like they're hot. I bet you, Jeff, that there have been teams that have said, oh, what are you thinking about Blake Coleman or something like that? And
for sure.
Calgary has no inclination to do any of that. And it's really something, because I bet to me in Calgary, the fact that they tried to extend Tanev and they pulled Markstrom off the market, and they continued to try to get Hanifin done for a while, that they agreed with those people who felt if they get into the playoffs, they're going to be trouble for someone to deal with, and they're disappointed that they couldn't keep that group together.
Yeah. The player that I wonder about, because I agree with you, like when it's obvious that you're selling off, and we've seen the work that Craig Conroy has done before, I mean, teams call, like, why not, to check on players that we may not think are available. You know who comes to mind for me? I would imagine teams would have called for right shot defenseman Rasmus Andersson. That's one guy I wonder teams would have. They're not going to do it, but in the spirit of Blake Coleman, hey, knock on that door and see who answers. I would imagine Rasmus Anderson too.
Who do you think answered?
Well, it'd be Craig Conroy. He's a first line of
Anderson.
defense. No, not at all. I don't think that he's going anywhere, nor do they want to do anything with Rasmus Anderson other than leave him where he is. Okay, here's a team we've wondered about for quite some time. What do they want to do? What are they able to do? How can they make it all work? We know where a lot of the holes are. How can they plug them? How creative can Ken Holland be? The Edmonton Oilers, Elliotte.
So to me, the most fascinating thing is, because I still don't think it's 100% clear, what are the Oilers going to say is their first priority? What is their first priority? I do think they were in on Tanev, and I will say this. I think Tanev was intrigued with the idea of playing in Edmonton. I do think it was something he considered and was something he was willing to do. And I also think that the Oilers offered the Flames a first-round pick with the proviso that they had to take a player off Edmonton's roster. Mm-hmm. And Calgary just didn't want to do that. They weren't interested in what that potential was. And so Tanev goes to Dallas, but it said to me that they were very interested in the player. Edmonton, we've mentioned Henrique. I do think they're still around him. We've mentioned Sam Carrick. I do think they're still around him. You mentioned Anthony Mantha, and I do think they've been around him. I've been told they are not the most likely destination for Jake Gensel, but they're looking at all of these players, right? They're looking, like, that's the kind of thing they're doing. And I think they're looking at a couple forwards, and I think they're looking at a D. What I can't figure out, and I'll say this, I think it depends on the player. I do. They definitely were in on Tanev. They definitely tried to get him, but now I think everybody's kind of wondering, and I do think they're around Sean Walker. I think the Oilers were looking for a little bit of edge on their blue line. And I think there are teams, as much as teams like Walker, this is not a shot at him, I think there are teams who don't necessarily believe he's the edgiest guy. But I think they're around him. Again, it's a similar situation. I believe if Edmonton's going to do that with Philadelphia or anyone else, they're going to say, we'll trade you the first, but you've got to do this with us too. Anything they do, money's got to go out. So I think that's all part of it. To me now, it's all about who do they put in the top priority, which position, which player. And again, I stick with, look, Skinner had a really good game on Saturday. He was excellent against Seattle. He's not playing Sunday night against Pittsburgh. That's Pickard's game. But I think they're ride or die with Skinner. I just don't see them going out and getting another goalie.
Mm-hmm. Could you see, a final thought here at Edmonton before you move along, could you see Jack Campbell, again, with Edmonton retaining, being part of any deal, or do you think teams are more aligned with, let's see if they buy him out in the offseason?
I think it's just a big price. You're asking people to eat a lot of money.
I know. I get that.
Is everything possible, Jeff? Yeah, I think it's possible, but I think it's more likely if you're using your assets right now, you'd rather use them to make your team better as opposed to pay to buy out Jack Campbell.
All right, a team that we're used to seeing Edmonton face off against in the postseason are the Los Angeles Kings. Rob Blake is not shy about the big deal. How is he about the trade deadline deal? What do you hear? What do you know?
Well, I think the name a lot of people have focused on is Matt Roy, just simply because he's a UFA. Sure. Boy, I hate making proclamations at this time of year. And, remember last year, Tyler Bertuzzi was off the block, and then a week later he was traded. So you have to be so careful about these things.
But that was, hang on, just pause on that. That was the Detroit Red Wings, though. Like, remember when they were gathering up steam and all of a sudden,
yes,
there's
but
no
that's
Bertuzzi,
my point.
And then they hit the wall, and then
well, they also lost to
available.
Ottawa twice, and Eisenman said we're not ready for this. So
correct.
But that's the thing; it just shows you how much stuff can change, right, Jeff?
Yep.
So you remember all that. So it appears as if it's unlikely that Matt Roy is going to be traded. I think the Kings are going to stand pat with him and go and then see what happens during the summer. Like, he's a good player. If you think there's any chance you can keep him, you might want to keep him. So it certainly seems that it would be a bit of a surprise if the Kings moved him. And all of their injured guys, the Kempe, we talked about this on Friday.
Yeah.
Kempe, Arvidsson, Anderson, and there's one other. They're all Grundstrom. They're all coming back. So it's not like he can hold into the playoffs and say, now I can add and these guys will come back. He's not in that position. So I think there's a couple of things here. If there's any talk about any players, it's Kaliev. And I'm not convinced the Kings are going to do that. I think if they really wanted to do it, they could have already done it. So I'm less convinced that's going to happen, although it still could. And I've wondered about a guy like Lizotte simply because I think there's teams that like that kind of player. I just don't know what the likelihood of that is or not. So, people seem to think the Kings are going to stand pat for the most part, nothing major. Of course, because I said that, they'll probably do some 14-player blockbuster. Yeah. But I'm going with it that they're likelier to stand pat. And also if you've watched a couple of their wins lately, it's when the Kings are at their best, that they play with good structure and their goalies are protected. So
did you see the Devils game? You see the Devils game on Sunday?
That was lockdown.
All over, just smothered them.
Yeah, and that was lockdown Sunday.
And yes. Danault was great too. We got to throw that in.
Well, he's a great player. But so when I look at the Kings, people say you got to get a goalie, and you could find a better goalie. But number one, the goalie market is really shrinking. Yeah, and that's true. Number two, I just think they feel if we play our best, our goalies should be good enough. So
one quick one quick point about the goalie market too. I was having this conversation on my radio show on Friday with Devin Dubnyk, and we were throwing around the idea of, I mean, listen, the obvious example is Ryan Miller to the St. Louis Blues. Starting netminders seldom go at trade deadline because it's so hard to acclimate a new starting goaltender into your system, into your team, with as much, rest days, CBA days, not so much practice down the stretch. It's really hard. It's really hard. It's really tough to bring in a number one goaltender. Teams have tried it, and I think, after teams saw the Ryan Miller experiment in St. Louis, I do wonder if that's made some teams gun shy about bringing in a starting goaltender at deadline. You just don't have enough time.
Dwayne Rollison talked about that with me once. Like, he went to Edmonton and they went to the Stanley Cup final in 2006. So that one worked okay. But he actually did say it was a bigger adjustment than he realized. Just in terms of, for example, something as playing the puck. The Edmonton defensemen were used to a certain thing before Rollison got there, and they fudged it up a little bit a few times once he arrived. Now, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and they probably win it if he doesn't get hurt. So there's your counter argument. But Rollison did say that it did take them some time to get used to each other.
I miss Dwayne Rollison, by the way. I miss goalies that play like that and defend their crease like that. I really miss Dwayne Rollison, Elliotte. Okay, from there, let's head to the San Jose Sharks, and we know what the game is here. Open for business, Elliotte.
The biggest question about the Sharks is, there's two challenges to this deadline. Number one is a lot of the teams that would be buyers don't have a lot of capital. Whether they've already spent a lot of their draft picks like Tampa and Boston and Florida and Toronto, or they don't have a lot of cap room, or they don't want to move some of their best prospects. They don't there's teams who told me that one of the reasons they think this is going to be quieter than normal. That's exactly it. It's because you don't have a lot to make trades. And the other issue is that when you look at some of the teams that are really out, they don't have a lot that teams want. We'll get to Chicago in that situation. We mentioned a couple of guys on Anaheim. But one of the problems that San Jose has is there's not a lot there that people are chasing. I think there's some interest in Duclair. There's some interest in Michael Granlund, who has another year remaining. I think there's some interest in Mario Ferraro, who's got a couple years more remaining. Yeah. Matt Benning would have been a guy I think there would have been interest in, but he's out. Yep. I do think teams have looked at Kokkonen, the goalie, but it's there's not a lot there, Jeff. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And if they trade someone like Ferraro or Granlund, they're going to want more of a price, obviously, and understandably. So, that's one of the things I think has been an issue for the Sharks is they're definitely going to try to move their UFAs if they can. I just think the challenge there has been that, between the price, whatever prices might be asked or whatever is available, teams just aren't clamoring to get what's there. And so that's been San Jose's biggest challenge. I do the one thing I definitely hear is that, Granlund is a guy who teams believe in the right situation, he can help you. And Ferraro is a guy who, even though he struggled this year, he's still very young. He's got a great work ethic. And if you get him in your situation, maybe you can work with him and make him better. There's definitely those feelings, but the prices are higher. And, I think San Jose's had a challenge moving some of these players.
Anything with Luke Cunnin? I mean, I know he's a restricted free agent.
I did mention his name with Edmonton a couple podcasts ago. I heard he was the kind of guy that Edmonton was looking at. I heard there were some people in Edmonton who liked him.
No surprise there. Okay, from the San Jose Sharks, as we wheel through the Pacific, we get to one of the more intriguing teams. Are they closer to the first-year team or last year's team that knocked out the defending Stanley Cup champions? They are the Seattle Kraken, Ron Francis's team. Elliotte?
Well, the number one thing I'm hearing about them is that a lot of people like their defense. You will not be surprised to hear that, Jeff, that a lot of teams that have called Seattle have asked about their defensemen. And from what I understand, what Ron Francis tells them is he's happy with his blue line. And so what you've got here is a situation where there's interest in guys like Larson, who I don't think is going anywhere. But there's also interest in other players, whether it's Will Borgen, whether it's been Jamie Alexiak. I mean, certainly Vince Dunn. I don't know that anyone is asking about that at all. And what Francis believes is, first of all, he doesn't want to tear his team apart, even though they've had a tougher year. Like, if you start dealing some of these guys, immediately you're looking to plug holes, and he's not interested in that. Now, Justin Schultz is a UFA, so you can see that. Yep. And I've heard some talk around Brian Dumoulin, just in the sense that Dumoulin's had a tough transition there this year. So I kind of wonder about how Seattle feels. But the ones that people have really targeted, the Borgens, the Larsons, and I think Alexiak, they're just not really interested in doing that. So we move up front, and they've got a few guys. The thing about Eberle is that I think Seattle wants to keep him. And I'm not sure one way or the other if he's going to be signed by next week. But there are some teams who believe it doesn't even matter. Like, if Seattle thinks they're going to be in a position where they're going to be able to sign him, they're going to hold him and get it done somewhere down the road. I think the other thing too there is, Eberle is at 996 games, and I think the Kraken would like it. It's not the biggest thing, but it's a thing. I think they would like it to be played for them. And he can only get to 998 before the deadline. 999 would be that night, and game 1000 would be Tuesday the 12th at home against Vegas. And it wouldn't surprise, someone actually mentioned it to me, it wouldn't surprise me if the Kraken wanted that game for them. Again, not the biggest deal, but another bit of circumstantial evidence in why Seattle might want to keep him.
Tomáš Tatar, Alexander Wenberg.
I've heard they've talked about with Wenberg too about keeping him. The teams are looking for centers, so I'm not sure how that's going to go, but that one I've heard could go either way too, Wenberg.
Okay. You ready for what's next?
Sure. Who is it? I should know this because we're going in alphabetical order, but I'm not very bright.
Their name rhymes with the Vancouver Canucks.
The Vancouver Canucks? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. That's where we're going next.
Well, look, they've already got their biggest victory, right?
They sure do.
You could argue they've already won the trade deadline. They got Pettersson done. Really crazy week. And, I wrote a big blog on Sunday night. And, one of the things I talk about was, Jeff, you and I have gone through contract negotiations before, not with each other, but with our companies. And there's times that those negotiations get nasty and those negotiations get hard. And, I have a rule that if I agree to sign, I have to try to move past whatever happened. I have to move, like if I take the money, I'm saying that I not necessarily condone, but I'm putting behind me what happened before.
You know what? I just pause on that.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. I always sort of project myself at my age into someone else's situation.
Yeah.
I would not be able to do that when I was 25. I could not do that. And Elias Pettersson is 25 years old. I know we want to treat them all as if they're, grown and, with families in their 40s. 25 is still, I know that I would have a hard time letting it go. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the point I was going to make before I was so rudely interrupted was that
lyrical flourish there. I thought they're coloring it in a little bit. Context.
The point I was going to make was that I believe the way that press conference went, and then you talk to people, right, and you hear the reaction. I believe that everybody here is doing just that. Pettersson was making jokes at the press conference. It's probably the first time he smiled in a month. because the team was going badly. And as he admitted, he was feeling the stress, but he was making jokes. And, the Canucks were in a cheery mood too, for obvious reasons. And, one of the things that, like, the tone of this press conference could have gone two ways. It could have been a celebration, or it could have been, we got this done despite like a really tense few days. And it was all celebration, which says to me that Pettersson's happy, and the Canucks, they aren't gloating here. They're like, this is a great thing for us. This is a great thing for our fans. This is a great thing for Pettersson. Let's celebrate the happiness. We don't need to talk about how much we were worried or how we had to pressure him or anything we tried here. Everybody could just focus on the happiness. And to me, Jeff, that says that everybody shook hands and they got it done. The other thing here I think that's really relevant, Jeff, is that it got done fast. Pettersson said early in the week, so the story I heard was that Rutherford and Alvin pulled Pettersson into a side room near the dressing room and said, what are you thinking? Can we do this here? Look at the stress on you. Look at the stress on the team. We're going through our first slump. We don't want a Matthew Tkachuk situation. We might have to trade you. And Pettersson took this all in. And I do think he had to consider whether or not they would actually trade him. But I think he took it all in and said, I'm leaning towards doing it. And, they said, think of how good it could be for the team if you sign. And Rutherford told him, okay, well, that's great, but just sleep on it for a night. And so he did, and he called them and he said, let's do it. And it was done in like 3 days. And you know what that said to me? That everybody was in place. The team, the moment that Pettersson said yes, the team and the agents, they were ready. And that's like, Jeff, when you're playing for the Super Bowl, like Mahomes this year, and you've got the ball at the 5-yard line at the end of the game, do you score the winning touchdown or do you fumble? And the Canucks didn't fumble. They got it done. And, it's a huge victory for them. And, the other thing here, too, is that Pettersson didn't take the biggest number he could. Now, if you'll notice, he's the highest paid Swede in the NHL now. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's insignificant. I would guess on some level that was very important to him. But he still took a number that's going to allow the Canucks to do some other things, like Quinn Hughes when it's his time. And, there's nothing about this that's bad for Vancouver. Now, I think, where do we go from here? I think they're going to look at a forward. I think defense is less important, but they're still going to look at it. But I think it's less important to them. I think they see a need at forward more.
Someone to kill penalties, Elliotte? That's what I'm guessing, kill penalties?
Or they need to decide on Phil Kessel. I mean, Rutherford could do anything. Like, he could do anything. But he's already got his biggest thing done. And I think the other thing they're going to do is, I think they're really going to work on what do we need to do to get Lindholm going here. I think they were hoping, I think everybody was hoping it would be a quicker start for him. And so now I think that becomes their number one thing. Like, what do we have to do to get Lindholm going?
And maybe get Thatcher Demko some rest. How about that?
Yes.
As well.
I think you're completely correct about that. Completely correct.
Couple starts for Casey DeSmith. Mix in a water with you. Mix in a water. Okay, Vegas Golden Knights. You want to talk about big swings? Kelly McCrimmon, not shy about any of it. What's the hot goss on the Vegas Golden Knights?
Well, I think they could be like there's two teams I kind of look at here, and one is Vegas and the other is Boston, and I'm really intrigued about what they could do. Vegas, Eichel, I think will be back. He could be back this week, so he's coming off LTIR, but Stone is going to be on it, and he's not going to play the regular season. And like I said, my doctor buddy says anybody who thinks you're fooling around with a ruptured spleen is a complete idiot. Like, you just don't know what you're dealing with there. So that's why there's no real knowledge about the timeline. I think this. I think that I think they're going to look. I think they're going to. I think they're going to look to get the best forward they can. And, teams are wondering if they'll do more. Will they, their defense is really good. They're really good down the middle. If you said that they would do 2 wingers, it wouldn't surprise people. I mean, if the goalie market was more robust, I would wonder what they might think there. But, don't forget, like, these guys won them a Stanley Cup last year, and at a time where they lost one of their goalies during the playoffs. So, those guys are battle tested. But like I said, I think they're going to try to get the best winger available. And someone said to me they wouldn't be surprised if they tried to get 2. They're going to be aggressive. Some teams are satisfied with 1 in a row, not Vegas.
No. I do wonder. I really do wonder if Kelly McCrimmon goes back to his old deadline trading pal, Doug Armstrong, for Pavel Buchnevich. I really do wonder.
Well, I would think he's already gone there. Like, I've heard the price on Buchnevich is high. Not impossible.
Of course it is. Totally.
But high.
He's got one more year too. Like, he's
I've got to think he's made that call already.
Okay. So that's the Pacific. We shift now to the Central, and a team that said, you know what, you may get 14 wins on us, but we're not going to give up the 15th, Arizona Coyotes.
Yeah, and then they won again.
I know. They can't break up the Coyotes.
Well, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to recognize Stan Wilson, the longtime equipment manager, 2,500 games. Sunday was his 2,500th game with the Coyotes. Longtime Shane Doan confidant and just very, very popular person around the league and in the organization. It's a great honor. And I'll tell you something else. He still looks great. 2,500 games in the NHL at just about any job. Someone's going to look like a Tyrannosaurus Rex eating victim. And he looks terrific. So congratulations to Stan. I think with Arizona, like Zucker, I think is a name. Obviously, a lot of people are talking about Dumba. I kind of thought maybe Dumba for the Leafs, but someone told me he's not the highest guy on their list, so I'm not so sure I would count on that anymore. You and I have talked about Bjugstad and Kerfoot. Yep. And I've mentioned both of them with Colorado. I think some other teams have looked at them too. I think it's less likely. I think those are the two guys. The UFAs, I think, are the guys that are kind of the focus. Just the one thing about the Coyotes, I think, is a real challenge is, and I don't know if that gets sorted out now or that gets sorted out later, but someone said to me, one of the other challenges they have now is if players think they're going to move, how is that going to determine their future with the team? So that's something else that they have to deal with.
I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but we just saw New Jersey pick up Curtis McDermott. Which Metropolitan team picks up Liam O'Brien from the Arizona Coyotes, since everybody seems to be loading up in the Metro for Matt Rempe?
That's a good question. I hadn't heard his name, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Maybe they keep him. He seems a pretty popular player there.
He sure is. They love him in Arizona. Okay, so there's the Coyotes. From there, we go to the Chicago Blackhawks, another team that is in sell mode.
Yeah, but they've done a lot of their work, right? Like, if you take a look at players that would have had interest, Jason Dickinson re-signed.
Yep.
Nick Foligno re-signed. Peter Mrazek, and I don't know how much interest there would have been in Mrazek, but he's re-signed
at a good number. A good number two for him.
So they've a lot of the guys they could have moved, they've kept on their own. Now there's still Colin Blackwell. That's a name that I've heard. And Colin Blackwell's a guy who's moved at deadlines before and played pretty well. It makes a lot of sense to me actually because he's done it before, and I've heard that he's a guy who's in that mix of names. The one I really wondered about was Connor Murphy. And unfortunately, Connor Murphy's been hurt, so I think that kind of takes him off the map here. But he's a guy that, because he had term, I think teams were looking at him. But since he's injured, I don't think that's going to happen. So maybe Blackwell. I've mentioned Tyler Johnson on this podcast before, but his number's a little bigger, so that's a challenge. Also, don't forget, Chicago can help facilitate deals.
They sure can. They have retained salary on Jake McCabe. Other than that, they have 2 slots available. Colorado Avalanche, Elliotte, an intriguing team. I mean, they have already made some moves. One of the eyebrow-raising ones was signing Zach Parise. Always good to see him back in the NHL. Just your thoughts on what Colorado does here, because I don't think for any stretch of the imagination anyone believes that they're anywhere close to done.
I have some teams. I should have mentioned them before too. There are definitely some teams who think that they're not going to be quiet. That they're going to, they said that if you take a look at some of who the most competitive GMs are, it's amazing how many people name former players and former top players like Rob Blake, Joe Sakic. Although Joe Sakic is no longer the GM, and Steve Yzerman. They may not play anymore, but they're still hugely competitive. And people have told me never to underestimate Sakic's competitiveness either, still. So there are teams who suspect that they will try to do something big. Center, no question about it. No question about it. And someone said to me that they wouldn't be surprised if Colorado has gone after centers who haven't been on people's radars yet. People maybe you wouldn't think of that player gets traded at this time. Those are the kinds of players that they think that Colorado has looked at. So I've kind of been going through my list, and to me, Bjugstad makes sense, Kerfoot makes sense. Name other centers. Scott Lawton is the kind of guy that would make sense. But, someone said to me that they think there's names out there that you wouldn't even. Adam Henrique would be another one that would make sense for them. But other players out there that you wouldn't have even thought of. I think they were in on Tanev too, so I wonder what they're looking at on the blue line as well. They've had some injuries this year. There's a lot there. And the other thing too, this whole Landeskog thing, Jeff. I don't know. Maybe it's just the extremely paranoid nature of the National Hockey League. But there's a lot of people who seem to think he's going to show up on April 20th or 21st or whenever it is. I mean, we'll see. But if he is coming back, then you have to go for it. Because you just don't know how much longer you're getting out of him, right?
Oh, 100%. Oh, 100%. I mean, listen, I have a hard time speaking objectively about Gabriel Landeskog and, the love affair.
Yes.
And the love affair I have for that player. But, 100%, Elliotte, for sure. Okay, anything more on Colorado before we move along? I think we're all on the same page. Look for them to do.
I have to think they're going to. Well, the other thing, too, is, Noonan got his first career shutout the other night, right?
Yes. Do you think they're comfortable with Noonan as their full-time backup here? No disrespect to Justus Noonan, but...
No disrespect to Justus Noonan, but there's no way they can be comfortable with this, says Jeff Marek. I've got to think they're still looking. I really think they were hoping that Fleury would be out there, but that's an NO spells no. So I don't know. I got to think they're still looking. I do. Even though he got that shutout, great thing for him, first career shutout, I got to think they're still considering it.
Okay, the Dallas Stars. So they've already made, I would argue, 2 moves. Elliotte, Chris Tanev is one. Do you know the other?
Well, you've been banging the Nick Seeler drum for a while, right?
But they've already made a move, even before getting to Nick Seeler here. You know what their other move feels?
Logan Stankoven?
Logan Stankoven. Yes. Does that not feel like a deadline move? Here you go, free awesome player. Enjoy this.
You're totally right, and they could win the Stanley Cup this year, no question. And they're already doing the salary cap dance. Send them down on the off day. bring him back up on the game day. Like, you have to do that. That's part of it. I still think they could look for depth. I mean, they really don't have the ability to do much because you have to subtract now, right? And I think we were having a conversation. Somebody was saying, well, you could subtract maybe someone like Radek Faksa, but not if the coach is a really big fan. In a year, you think you can win the Stanley Cup. So, do I think that Jim Nill's the kind of guy that would always fine tune? Yeah, I do think that, but there's a limit to what you can do. And if you're already playing the cap games because Stankoven is making such a big impact, then you're probably staying pretty close to pat.
I do wonder about Sealer. I think they want to get a little nastier back there. And listen, they got Tanev, and I think that they're not, they didn't get Lyubushkin. I think you go down the list of players that I think Jim Nill covets, the types of players. I think Sealer fits the bill to a T. And I agree with you. I think they could win the Stanley Cup definitely. Minnesota Wild, Elliotte. We've had the ups and the downs and the streaks and the firings. What do you make of Minnesota at deadline?
I just think they're going to let it play out. They're definitely trying to extend Zach Bogosian. They've indicated that Marc-Andre Fleury is not going to be traded. Somebody said to me, don't be stupid, don't make any bold pronouncements. And you're right. There something could always change, but I felt better when I saw that Michael Russo reported it when he came out and said Fleury will not be moved after, we talked about it. Then I said, that's the official state of Minnesota seal of approval. And so Fleury's going to stay. Definitely what Minnesota said is they're not doing anything short term. Yeah. If there's something bigger and bolder, fine, they'll consider it, but I don't think anything short term. And I'll tell you, that Duhaime is a really interesting player. I do think he's the kind of guy that teams have looked at. And if they can't sign him or they are unable to sign him, that's a guy that's going to crash and bang and win you a playoff game or two. So I'm not expecting anything major out of them, especially since now we're hearing that Fleury is not going to be traded. So I think it's going to be a quiet deadline for Minnesota. Here's a 26-player trade that the Wild have just unveiled, but the expectation is it's going to be quiet for Minnesota.
Bill Guerin just wakes up and says, "Screw it, I'm going for it." Speaking of going for it, the team that refuses to lose, the Nashville Predators. We've talked about UC Saros being off the market. You've talked about them inching closer to a deal with Tommy Novak.
I think that's done, all but done, and it's just a matter of when they decide to announce it.
Right. How much have fortunes changed in the last 2 to 3 weeks for the Nashville Predators?
A lot, because
you two turn this team around.
Well, yeah, and like we said on Friday, the players deserve a lot of credit because it could have sank their season. It absolutely could have sank their season, and they haven't lost since then. So what that says to me is you've got a really professional team. They're pros, and that's a high compliment. I think I used to think that being called a pro was like a bit of an insult, but I've learned that when it comes to athletes, being called a pro is like a big compliment because it indicates that you understand what it takes to be successful. And those guys are pros. People were telling me a couple weeks ago, you're not talking about Nashville enough, like all their guys could go. And I think now, Saros, as you said, Novak getting done. And I think it's possible there are going to be more that get done. I don't think that
Trennan?
I wonder
about Trennan. I wonder about Trennan.
I just think, Jeff, it's possible that Novak isn't the only. I don't know. I don't know to handicap it, but someone just said to me, "Don't be surprised if Novak isn't the only extension announced this week." I mean, we'll see where it goes. Nothing's done until it's done. But the Novak thing is a big letdown. I saw in Rink Fries you mentioned the Rangers. I think he was on Vancouver's list too, and I don't think they were the only ones. I think there were a few teams looking at him. But someone said to me they might add, and I'm like, what? And they go, not hugely expensive, but they might add. The Predators. all of a sudden the Predators are feeling something. And, the one thing about Brunette is he tries to coach offensive hockey, right? So they're going to look, and I'll say this too. Like someone said to me this week, there is not enough talk about Yossi and what Yossi has done this year.
Elliotte, every night it's 3 points.
Yeah.
Every night, at the end of the night, you look at, oh yeah, Yossi 1 goal, 2 assists. Oh yeah, Yossi 3 assists. Oh yeah, Yossi 2 goals, 1 assist. It's every night. It's every night with Yossi now. He's been great. Okay, from Nashville, we head to St. Louis. And listen, we have seen Doug Armstrong in action in previous deadlines.
Yeah.
I expect him to be active again this deadline. Agree or disagree?
I think, the one thing about St. Louis is, like, Jeff, I have no idea what to expect from them. When I turn on a game, there's times I turn on and they look like they could beat the 1977 Montreal Canadiens. And there's times I turn them on and I don't think they could beat the expansion Washington Capitals. I just don't know what I'm going to see from them on any particular night.
Pause for 1 second, because I don't disagree. I think most people that have watched St. Louis feel the same way. And we've seen teams like that. The conclusion I've always come to about teams like that look just so like wildly inconsistent. Whenever I see that, my default thought is that means they have players playing one slot higher than they should. And sometimes it works, but most times it doesn't. That's what I've arrived at, my own little nickel and dime analysis of watching hockey for all these years. Does St. Louis feel that way to you? There's too many guys playing one slot above where they should be.
Maybe. They have some great players, but I think that's
for
fair.
Sure they do.
Look, I think a lot of it is on Butch Navich. Are they going to do that? The thing about St. Louis is Doug Armstrong's had a lot of guys available for some time this season. And obviously there's been no nibbles, no bites, nothing like that. But, the guys on his team that people really want, he hasn't had those guys out there. Well, now what's the line we've joked about with Buchnevich? Armstrong says, well, you can ask, but you're not going to like the price. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's like what we talked about with Vetrano earlier. The price is out there. It's a lot. Are you willing to pay it and make the Blues think? And that's kind of the way I look at it. Other than that, I think he's got a few guys out there, and we'll see if anybody's feelings change. But he's definitely got one player who a lot of teams like, and it comes down to how Armstrong's going to feel over the next 4 or 5 days.
How do you think they feel about their blue line, Elliotte?
I think they would change it. He's tried to move some of those defensemen.
I was going to say, it feels like they've been trying to change their blue line for a while, right? Like Torrey Krug was almost a Philadelphia Flyer.
Yep.
And I would imagine there's been conversations about other guys on that back end. It's just weird. It just feels to me like they've wanted to do something with it for a few years and haven't been able to. Did they get that done at trade deadline? Who knows? We'll see. Winnipeg
Don't forget,
Jets.
he's got control, and a lot of those guys have control.
Well, and that's why he's still a St. Louis Blue. Winnipeg Jets, one of our favorite topics always to discuss. What do you see Cheveldayoff doing at deadline? Last year it was Nino Niederreiter. What do you think this time around?
I don't know that I'm expecting Winnipeg to do very much here. They won again what a huge win on Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
They looked finished in Carolina. They came back and won that game. They won Sunday night in Buffalo, another game they were losing 2-1, and they came back and they won that game. Things are going really well for them. I would say that the only concern is, what are we dealing with Velarde here? And if that's a problem, do you have to replace it? But do I think maybe they've considered defense? Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. But also don't forget They've got some good depth defensemen in the organization. Heinola, they've kind of talked about giving him another opportunity because he got hurt. Capobianco has been a big scorer in the American Hockey League this year. I do think they've at least considered the possibility of going bigger than that. To me, I don't know off the top of my head that they have considered anything much larger than another defenseman. You know, I know their fans there. They want to see Ehlers on the top line.
Yes.
But if you look at their forwards and you look at their D, there are kind of places for everyone. You know, they're going to have to create more room for Perfetti, but that now might be a next season thing for Perfetti to play in a scoring role. But when you look at a Rick Bowness team, it's very clear that he sees roles for everyone. Almost everyone on this team, almost everyone has clearly defined roles, and Bowness likes that. So I would be curious to see, unless he went out and was able to get like another D who really moved the needle, I would be very curious to see how the Jets would tamper with what Bowness has here. He seems to really like his mix.
And hopefully you're liking this mix. We're going to pause on our trade deadline preview. Montana's Thought Line is coming up next, and then we do the Eastern Conference, the 2 divisions, 16 more teams to go. Don't go anywhere. Listen to the 32 Thoughts podcast ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Elliotte, time now for the Montana's Thought Line. Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Canada's home for barbecue.
Try the ribs.
Especially tasty at trade deadline. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca, 1-833-311-3232. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca, 1-833-311-3232. Twain from Anaheim.
Oh, by the way, Ron
Yes?
had a great line last week. He thinks that you write all of the weird rules questions, that there's not different people. And he says that few of the Thought Line voice messages sound like Brody.
He might be right. He might be right on that one. I'm just trying to get my kids a little bit of voice acting time. Not true, Ron McLean. And how dare you question the credibility of the Montana's Thought Line? These are all super legit and curated by Griffin Porter, and I will have no one denigrate the fine name of Griffin Porter. So let's get to it. This is Twain from Anaheim. Subject: knocking off the nets. Here's what he submits. My dad is an original season seat holder for the Ducks, so I've watched a ton of games in my life. However, last night I was befuddled. Great use of the word befuddled. Yeah. The Anaheim Ducks intentionally dislodged the goal while the puck was behind the net after a scramble with only 2.1 seconds left.
Vetrano.
That's right. That's your guy. Is he going on deadline? Smart play, I thought, till they called the penalty shot. Logically, this was only because the refs are always out to get us, Ducks, and surely not an actual rule. Sarcasm. Why was this a penalty shot? First of all, I would take exception that there was a smart play. There's like 2 seconds left, and you're giving Jack Hughes a penalty shot. Why dislodge the net? But, Elliotte, as you well know, this is an actual rule. This is rule 63.6. Actually, I had to do some work for this one. Had to open up the rule book. So here it is. Rule 63.6, penalty shot. If by reason of insufficient time in the regular playing time or by reason of penalties already imposed, the minor penalty assessed to a player for deliberately displacing his own goalpost cannot be served in its entirety within the regular playing time of the game or at any time in overtime, a penalty shot shall be awarded against the offending team. Essentially, if it's under 2 minutes and you do it, it's going to be a penalty shot.
Yes. Now, there should have been one Saturday
here we go.
night.
I knew you were going to go. I knew you were going to do it.
So
okay, go ahead.
I didn't realize this. By the way, the Toronto Ranger game was a great game on Saturday.
It was.
That was just great hockey.
Yeah.
But in overtime, Lafreniere stepped into Mitch Marner to break up a great scoring chance with 7 seconds left in overtime. It was a smart play by Lafreniere. It was really smart play. A good move. However, there is a rule in the rule book, and Ron found it. I think it's 74.4, that if there is a deliberate too many men or a legal substitution penalty in overtime or with less time than there is remaining than a penalty to serve, it's a penalty shot. Yep. That should have been a penalty shot. Now, the one thing someone said to me is that the word deliberate is doing a lot of work. Mm-hmm. You could argue that that's not deliberate, although I think it was. Like someone said to me, a referee could say deliberate means like 4 guys jumping on the ice to break up the play. That's deliberate. Yeah. But I mean, I guess that sounds like a good defense lawyer's case. Yeah. To me, that was smart, deliberate, and it should have been a penalty shot. Like, I know the Ottawa fans are really mad about penalty shots after the one at the end of the game in Philadelphia. I'm pro penalty shot. Call them. Make it exciting. Like nobody was uninterested when Jack Hughes was trying to score at the end of that game on Friday night. So I'm pro penalty shot. I want to see them as much as possible. I think that but I'll admit I didn't know that rule. And I'm betting that I wasn't the only one in that building who didn't know that rule, but I would call it.
You know what I've wondered if they ever try to clean up in the rule book around too many men. If you leave the player on the ice once the call has been made.
Oh, would you stop with
this?
No.
I'm just wondering if they ever think to clean that up and come up with a subsequent penalty for it if you don't go back to the bench. Because essentially you're giving a team an extra player to get possession to end the delayed penalty. I'm just curious if they do it or not. Because all it's going to take is a smart coach saying,
why don't you mention this the next 96 podcasts?
Why are you coming back to the bench? Stay out there. Go get the puck. The arm is up. We're already getting the call. Okay, here's a question about waivers. It's your favorite topic, Elliotte. Hunter Miller has a question about waivers. He submits, hey, Jeff, Elliotte, and Dom, longtime listener, first-time writer. With the trade deadline around the corner, I had a question about waivers. Can a team pick up someone who's put on waivers after the trade deadline and have them be eligible to play in the playoffs? For example, can the Maple Leafs wait to put one of their goalies on waivers to reduce the potential of someone picking them up because they won't be eligible? Thank you, and keep up the great work, especially you, Dom. Oof. P.S. I have secured my first job in the field of journalism ahead of graduating this April. Congratulations. And couldn't have done it without motivation from 32 Thoughts.
Wow.
Hunter Miller.
Well, first of all, Hunter, good luck in your career. Yes. Secondly, as a thank you for allowing us to motivate you, please don't take either one of our jobs.
Mm-hmm. And as I always say about journalism, if your mother says she loves you, get confirmation.
Good luck, Hunter. All the best. Now,
absolutely.
One thing you should realize here is that after the trade deadline, everything changes. The trade deadline is really the playoff roster deadline. You have to have somebody on your roster to be eligible to play for your team during the playoffs. Now, there can still be trades after the trade deadline. There can. But that player is not eligible to play for you in the playoffs. And the other thing, too, is that after the trade deadline, when it comes to waivers, if you're claimed post-deadline, you cannot play in the NHL even in the regular season. So that's the issue with waivers after the deadline. So you rarely see it. Players can be sent down, but you rarely see anyone claimed unless you're claiming someone for your AHL team or for next year.
With that, we'll wrap it up. We'll get back to our trade deadline preview. The Montana's Thought Line, Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Canada's home for barbecue. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca, 1-833-311-3232 is the way to get in. And no, Ron McLean, I don't curate these on my own and have my children voice them. Although now that you bring it up, I am kind of tempted. 16 more teams next. Okay, welcome back to our trade deadline preview. We've gone from the Western Conference now to the Eastern Conference. And before we get there, we'd like to remind you, as always, this podcast presented by the GMC Sierra. GMC has been with us for a lot of years. We thank them for their continued support.
Change your oil.
You're not going to let it die. It's 2 podcasts in a row. You're trying to make another tagline.
Somebody actually texted me that they laughed their head off when that came
Change
out.
your oil?
So,
Check your oil?
So I got one person who liked it. I'm going to stick with it.
Check your oil. Okay, look under your hood. Here we go. Metropolitan Division. We'll start with the Carolina Hurricanes. They've already tried to get a little frisky, Elliotte.
Yes, they were definitely made a legit offer for Pettersson. And, here's the thing when it comes to the Hurricanes. They're a really good team, an excellent team. They have withstood this year as they have gone through, you could argue, an actual hurricane in net. And Frederik Andersen could be back this week. They've done a real great job considering the craziness in goal, similar to Toronto. Carolina can check. They can defend. They're very hard to play against. Last year, they reached the Eastern Conference Final, and Jeff, what did they lose?
Because goals are hard, Elliotte. Goals
they could
are hard.
not score. They could not score. So there is not a single person who doesn't look at this team and say, if they get a goal scorer, they could win. And there are not dumb people who work for the Hurricanes. They see the same thing that everybody else does. Now, Carolina's history is they do not pay for rentals. And that's generally been the way that they have operated. Now it's possible again that they could find some really good depth players, depth scorers for not the highest price. But, and again, this is other people talking, not me, is there going to come a day where the Hurricanes say, it is our time to do it. We're going to bend our principles and we're going to do it. And the years you bend the principles are the years where you're good enough to win. And to me, if that team went out and got, say, Jake Gensel, I think they could win the Stanley Cup. And the one thing, and I'll say this, someone called me Sunday. On Saturday night, I talked about Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is telling teams they don't want picks for Gensel. They want prospects. That's what they prefer.
Yep.
When you look at the teams that have some of the best prospects, Carolina is right up there. I don't know if you want to argue at the top or near the top, but they are right there. And so will this be the year that Carolina bends their principles to try to win the Stanley Cup? The answer may be no, but they could win the cup with more scoring.
See, I thought you were warming up to drop the name Frank Vatrano, who has term and fits the model of what Carolina looks for.
That's a great call, Jeff. That's a great call, an excellent call. But Carolina can win the cup, and they lost last year because they couldn't score. Now, I know what the Hurricanes fans are going to say. We didn't have Svechnikov. Yeah, I know. But still, you can never have too much scoring. Never, ever.
All right. From a buyer to a seller, the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have a lot of decisions on their horizon here, not just who they're selling, but also who they're hiring in some key positions. Who's going, Elliotte?
Well, first of all, Kent Johnson, what a nightmare year. Torn labrum out for the rest of the season. I think this, Jeff, I think the biggest question is, does Columbus wait to make its biggest decisions when a new manager takes over? And so, for example, John Davidson's on with you, and he says Boone Jenner's not going anywhere. And, right. I understood. But the more I think about that, the more I think that if there is any decision to be made on Boone Jenner, it's not going to be made until there's a permanent person there. So I think it's It's Merzlikins if there's a move there to be made. It's Provorov if there's a move there to be made. But anything major that's franchise altering, I don't think they're doing that now. I think they punt that into the summer or the draft, and they see what whoever new in charge of the team decides to come up with. So I think they're sticking to their plan or what was kind of created under Kekalainen when the season went sideways, and the big decisions come in the summer.
All right, from Columbus to New Jersey, that was a really tough loss against the Los Angeles Kings on Sunday. It was also a tough loss against the Anaheim Ducks on Friday. Elliotte, this has been a tough go for the New Jersey Devils.
Really tough, and they got smut. Like Anaheim was everything that's been their season. They outshot the Ducks by 31 and lost the game. I got to tell you, the Anaheim Ducks fans, they're still mad at the Toronto Sun. They disrespected Lucas Dostal once, and the Leafs weren't even involved in the game on Friday, and they were taking shots at the Toronto Sun for how great Dostal played. So they lose that game, even though they were dominating, and they lose on Sunday. And as you said earlier in the pod, they got completely smothered. LA was at their best. So if you saw Saturday night's show, I believe the New Jersey Devils have decided that Jacob Markstrom is going to be their goalie. They hope. And Markstrom, if they don't get Markstrom done this week, they are going to wait to try to do it in the summer. And a little bit is out of their hands. This has to happen between Markstrom and Calgary. But, if the relationship is fractured, New Jersey sounds like they're willing to wait until see how this plays out and get him. Now, they can't say anything. He's not their player. It's tampering. But I believe I have this one correct. Now, so if you don't see the Devils go out and get a goalie with term, it's because they're going to wait to see how this plays out over the next few months. Now, I will say this. I got a few DMs from Devils fans that are not pleased, and they were good about it, but they were not pleased with my stance that it's about losing Severson, losing Graves. And then Graves, and then Hamilton getting hurt. They talked about Siegenthaler and Marino has struggled, and there's no question they're all right. My point is that when your defense, like to me, I think one of the most important things for a team is that people are able to handle their roles, right? And sometimes what happens when you lose depth, people are asked to go into roles that maybe they will be ready for, but they're not yet ready for. And I think that's happened with New Jersey this year. Like to me, honestly, I think the one thing the Devils are trying to tell everybody is they don't believe their window is closed because they're struggling this year. They believe their window is open, and it's going to remain open for a long time while guys like Hischier and Bratt and Jack Hughes are in their primes. So yes, this year was a step back. And yes, I think some people were pressed into roles that they couldn't handle, and some players struggled. But they believe that they're still very much on the upward part of their curve, and they will address it. So we'll wait. I think this is not only going to be a deadline thing, but it's also going to be a summer thing. A couple other things here. Tyler Toffoli, I have heard that they're not too eager to move him, that they'll take a chance at re-signing him. I think, Toffoli's was in LA, obviously, on the weekend. His agent's based in LA. I'm sure there were some conversations. But this to me is a tough one to call, because I've had a couple people say to me that they think that Toffoli is more of a wish on the weekend than a likelihood, and they wouldn't be surprised if Jersey takes their chances here. The price is high. So what the indication is that it's a bit of a poker game between both New Jersey and the other teams, New Jersey and Toffoli, and also that they believe the preference is for New Jersey to try to sign him. And the other thing too is New Jersey's going to start winning games, but it's this whole thing where Philly, they righted themselves on Saturday with the win against Ottawa, but they've been kind of wobbly. And I believe those other teams that are chasing them, they don't think it's over. And some of them I don't think want to give up the season with 5 weeks to go. They still think they can catch them. And I wonder if New Jersey's one of them. But they got to start taking care of their own business.
Absolutely. New York Islanders, a really interesting team, Elliotte. It's Lou Lamoriello, so nothing's getting out. There's a lot of players with a lot of term. This is a team that, once again, had high expectations. What did they do come deadline time here? Can they do anything?
I'd like to tell you everything the Islanders are up to, but it's Lou Lamoriello, as you said.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting a sell-off. There was social media noise around Brock Nelson, and I tried to call around and say, is there anything, to this, or is it just noise? And I don't think there's anything to it. Someone made a joke to me. I wrote in my notes that Lou Lamoriello would rather, eat his left leg than trade Brock Nelson. And the other thing too is if you trade him, you're really changing the soul of your team. So I just think that's talk. And I think you're right. I think the Islanders, who got a big win on Saturday night in Boston and finished Sunday 6 points out of the playoffs with decent math. They've got 2 games in hand on Detroit and 3 on Tampa Bay. I think they're going for it. Like, again, I confess this to Islander fans who want more out of me. It's all speculation with Yzerman, but his history is he doubles down. Rarely do you see him pull the chute at the trade deadline, especially in this kind of a situation. It's his history to double down. So I don't know if they're going to add, although they've been looking for a scorer for some time, but I definitely don't think they're going to break it up. I just don't.
All right, Rangers. This is a team that we've talked plenty about. This is a team that we've wondered about. How are they going to fill the hole left by Philip Hedl? I mentioned on my blog on Sunday about the interest in Tommy Novak. We know they've been interested in other players as they look to put the final pieces on what they believe is a Stanley Cup quality team. What do you see happening with the Rangers between now and Friday?
I think they're going to add. They got Jonathan Quick done on Sunday.
Congrats. That's great.
By the way, could I be a bigger idiot? I was chatting with Quick after the morning skate on Saturday, and you think I would have asked him about his contract situation or anything like that. Not that he would have told me, but it's just still could ask. As you mentioned, and Novak was one of their targets. If you remember, Drury last year, he operated late.
And with volume.
Yes, latent with volume. And again, he's only been a GM for a year, so there's not a huge book on him, but based on that, you're wondering, okay, we're already 4 days before the deadline, so you're thinking, okay, there's the possibility this could happen again. And also too, the later you go, the easier it is on your cap situation. For example, he's looking for a center. The Blake Wheeler situation had him thinking about wingers again too. He was already looking for depth. So I had people saying to me, Blackwell, who we mentioned, who got a video tribute when he went back was Kevin Rooney. So Kevin Rooney was someone people were kind of wondering about a bit. The Rangers know him. Obviously Vetrano, but we know that's a big price. Vetrano is a big price. How does Drury feel about paying what is a big price for them there? So, and I've mentioned Tyler Johnson before. I really do think that Novak was their guy. I think that was the guy they really liked. So I'm trying to figure out where his biggest strike is going to be after that. And then how does he fit around that with the likes of Blackwell, is it going to be Vetrano or is it going to be someone else? And, where does it go then with the likes of the Rooneys, the Blackwells, the Kyle Okpozos, like players like that who can fit into roles? Because those are the kinds of guys I think he's looking at too. But Novak's signing or imminent signing took away the big one I think we were all kind of wondering about.
For sure. Speaking of wondering about, we've wondered all season long about the Philadelphia Flyers, and was this a mirage? It's not. This is a good team. This is a team that's tucked into a playoff spot, yet this is a team that might be subtracting from the lineup. Elliotte, we wonder again about Walker. We wonder about Sealer. Do they get traded? Do they re-sign? What does Daniel Briere have up his sleeve? How do you see Philadelphia around this time? And is there a chance that they do nothing?
Well, I'll say this. Philly might actually do a little bit of adding. And this to me is the real tell. And I'm not talking big ads, unless it's like a player that's going to be there for a long time. Like, I do think Philly has taken a look at Zegras. I just don't know that they have what Anaheim wants. I don't know if there's a fit there or that they're willing to pay what Anaheim wants. I don't know that there's a match there, but I think they looked at it. But I think Philly, there's a little bit here. You can see by the way that Tortorella's coaching, he's gone after Cam Atkinson this week. He's gone after Sean Couturier, and he's gone after Bobby Brink. Like, he doesn't discriminate against veterans or rookies. And that says, boy, he wants to make the playoffs. And those players, they do too. I have wondered if Philly takes a couple of small looks at goal and maybe a veteran forward. Cheap, inexpensive price. Like, that's why Martin Jones is not on waivers in Toronto, because they know someone like Philly, he's not getting by them. And I've heard they're looking for an inexpensive and not high-priced veteran forward too. So they're looking. Walker, I think it's poker. You've got Danny Briere is playing poker with both the other teams and the agents. Sean Walker, I think he wants a 5th year. Nick Sealer, I think his number is a little bit higher than Philly's willing to go. And nobody's budging yet. So I've said this 1,000 times. That's what I think. That's the game I think Briere's playing. Who's budging? Who's sticking to what they do? And if everybody sticks to their positions, then it's Briere's choice. What do we do here? And I think he's still trying to figure that out. Lawton, that's another one I've heard the price is high. I've heard it's more likely than not that he stays. But again, I'm freely willing to admit that I could be wrong about that. So, but I've heard the price is really high on Lawton. I just heard on Sunday as I was making my calls, Philly's true desire here, if you see them go get an inexpensive and low-cost goalie or an inexpensive and low-cost forward, they've decided they're going for the playoffs.
Going to be a big week for the Philadelphia Flyers, it sounds like, no matter what they do. This has been one of the more intriguing teams around the NHL, one of the more surprise teams around the NHL. Nashville to the west, Philadelphia to the east. What about the Pens, the team we wondered about going back to last season? The band is, as we know, together. They've added Erik Karlsson. It hasn't gone as they would have liked it to have gone, despite the fact that Sidney Crosby seems determined to push this ball up the steepest of hills almost by himself. What do you see Dubas doing?
I think, look, awful loss in Calgary on Saturday night. A really tough loss. The Flames, what's the old line? Unfortunately, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were
Pens
about
had
to win. Yeah, they had them, and they lost. And then they lost in northern Alberta on Sunday night to Edmonton. So, look, we can see the writing on the wall here. He's going to move guys. and he there's the obvious ones he's not going to move, and then he went to Brian Rust and told Brian Rust that they're not even going to ask him to waive his no move clause, and he's hurt, but teams would take him. And Gensel's going to get moved here, I think. On Saturday, I said, what are the chances that they go back to Gensel and sign him? And I had people saying to me like 95.5 he gets traded. So it's a major upset at this time if he signs. So where are we looking at here? We're looking at Vegas. We're looking at Carolina. We're looking at Florida. We're looking at Edmonton. We're looking at Vancouver, with all the caveats I've mentioned in all of these teams. What I'm curious about here, young Jeffrey, is does Gensel get permission, or do teams get permission to talk to Gensel? Now, the reason I ask that is two things. Number one, you get a better return if you trade for him. And number two, while I think it's unlikely, I have wondered if teams that are out of the playoffs this year but wish to be in the playoffs next year would ask for the opportunity to talk to him. I don't think that's impossible.
Do you see them doing anything with their net minding?
I do. I mentioned it last. I think there's some interest in Nedeljkovic, especially. I think it's less likely it would be Jari, but I've heard that there's been some interest in Nedeljkovic, and it would not surprise me at all if he was traded.
All right. 2005-2006 season, Elliotte. NHL comes out of the lockout. There's a shiny new logo. There's a new rules package. There's a couple of new stars to market the game around. I just mentioned Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins a couple of seconds ago. And as we found out in a very interesting Brian McClellan press conference, for the first time since Alexander Ovechkin joined the Washington Capitals in the NHL, it sounds like the Capitals are taking a slight retreat now for the first time since Ovechkin's been there. First of all, your thoughts on, we should mention Yevgeny Kuznetsov as well. Your thoughts on the Kuznetsov being waived to Hershey, and also what we heard from Brian McClellan on Saturday.
Well, obviously the first thing you say is you hope he's all right. He was cleared to practice on Saturday, and I don't think it was discussed on when he returned, let's get him a fresh start. I think that had been discussed a while ago. Mm-hmm. So the Capitals just looked at, let's just do that. Earlier in the season, I don't think these conversations were held just as he was coming out of the program and was eligible to return to practice. I think these conversations were earlier in the year. The Capitals and Kuznetsov and his representatives were engaged in conversations about starting over. And the Capitals have decided to go through with that now that he's returned to the organization. I don't think anybody was surprised he cleared waivers. And I think that the question is going to be what happens next. And like I said, first of all, you just hope he's all right. He's got $7.8 million due next season. And if he was tradable, it would have already happened. And don't forget, the closest it came, as far as we know, was last year at the draft. Nashville and Washington were discussing a Kuznetsov for Matt Duchene deal that fell apart, and then Nashville bought out Duchene. And one of the reasons Nashville was considering Kuznetsov is because Barry Trotz is there, who Kuznetsov won a Stanley Cup and played with in Washington and played great. Now, I would expect that there'll be a buyout in the offseason if it gets there. But I was talking about this with someone on Saturday afternoon, and he brought up the name Philip Zadina. And I said, wow, that's a lot of money to walk away from.
Big chunk of change. Wow, yeah. Elliotte. That's
like Zadina walked away from a few $1 million, which was
five. It's $5 million bucks. Yeah.
A bold decision that everybody talked about. So if Kuznetsov was to get bought out, the $2 million signing bonus, you get that no matter what. A buyout does not affect that. That's why so many players structure their contracts this way, with signing bonuses later in their deals, because they're buyout proof. He's getting that, Kuznetsov, no matter what. A buyout will cost him $2 million of the $6 million in salary he's owed. So he'll get $4 million. Now, so he will get $2 million signing bonus plus $4 million cash over 2 years if he gets bought out. If the contract is terminated, he loses everything. So you have to show a way that a team could sign Kuznetsov in a place he wants to go, where he's going to say, okay, I'll walk away from that money or that buyout. It's hard to see it.
I don't know what team that could possibly be, Elliotte.
Or maybe Kuznetsov is like Zadina. He just says, "I want to play,"
start.
but that's a lot of money to walk away from. Like it is. So, but I felt I had the responsibility to mention it simply because it's a possibility, and someone was talking it with me. I would say it's unlikely, but you got to mention it.
Sure. Capitals on the move. Meanwhile, we've talked about Nick Dowd. We've talked about Anthony Mantha. How do you see the Caps between now and Friday?
I think Nick Jensen is another one who's had a few people look at him. I think the Leafs are one of the teams that looked at Nick Jensen. Edmonton's had a few people around on him. Jensen is a couple more years after this one. So I don't know how teams view that, if they do view that well or not. I'll tell you this, I think the Capitals have also discussed goaltending because they have a kid, Clay Stevenson, who is ready soon. He's given the "we've got to get younger" quote. So, and Dowd is another one. They've put him in the bubble just to keep him safe. And, he's another guy that definitely there is interest in. So they have players that people are looking at. It's just, basically it's going to come down to preference, how people feel about. Oh, another name that people mentioned to me was Beck Malenstein, who's got 16 points this year in 58 games. He's making $762. A couple people told me, like, don't be surprised if teams have poked around him as well.
How deep do you think this goes? Like, this is new territory for the Washington Capitals.
I think they'd like to have some flexibility this summer. I do.
How much of a step back? Because we're not used to this out of the Caps, right? It's always been like the Penguins. They have Crosby. Washington has Ovechkin. It's full steam ahead.
I think they want to create some flexibility. I think Washington has been doing their research on guys who might be available this summer. I really do think they want to kind of change up their mix. For example, I've talked now like Hanifin. I think he's a Tampa Bay guy. Like that's his preference. But I think Washington's been around there. Okay? I think they want to change themselves a little bit.
All right, we'll see how much they end up changing themselves by Friday. Okay, so that's the Metropolitan. We're finishing up with the Atlantic, and we'll start with an intriguing team as well, and that is the Boston Bruins, a team that you can look at and say, you know what? They have a chance to win the Stanley Cup here. They probably had a chance to win the Stanley Cup last season, but they ran into the Florida Panthers. Your thoughts on what Sweeney wants to do here, and what do you think he can accomplish by Friday?
As I said earlier in the pod, I think Boston has a chance to be one of the really fascinating teams. There's a decent chance we're headed towards another Boston-Toronto series, another 7 games of Marchand mayhem.
We're going to see a preview on Monday.
We're going to see a preview on Monday night on Monday Night Hockey. Look, they don't have a lot of picks to move. They've sold all those off. But the 2-word phrase I've heard with Boston is hockey trades. And you know what that means, Jeff?
Body's going?
Bodies. Now, I think they're looking for some depth, but I've definitely heard the phrase hockey trades tied in with the Bruins.
Now,
And you look through their roster and, like Jake DeBrusk, I really don't like talking about him because of the obvious family connection. He's an unrestricted free agent. You take a look at some of the other guys. Grizzlick's a free agent. There's a lot of noise around Ullmark. Now, one thing about Ullmark to know is that he has a half league no trade. And during the middle of a season, especially if you're leaving a really good team, it's hard to see players agreeing to that, right?
oh yeah.
So I don't have any insight on what Ullmark might be thinking, but it has been hinted to me by some other teams in the league that in mid-season it's going to be tough to get Ullmark to alter his list. So if that's real, and I do think the Bruins have at least investigated it, it's got to be somewhere he's already willing to go. And so I just think the Bruins are considering some things with roster players. And we'll see where it goes here. But I don't know what I want to put the percentages on here. But they're looking for centers. I think they do something on their blue line. They got 3 UFAs on their blue line.
Yep.
And in a weird goaltending market, they've got a chip if they wanted to play. That's a really good chip, although they don't have full control over the situation. But at the very least, I think they've been weighing some things for quite some time.
Could Hanifin be a fit here?
Again, he's declared where he'd like to go. Absolutely, he's a fit. Absolutely, he is. But the Bruins have to be in the game.
All right. A team where we expect some exits. We're at the beginning of the season. We thought they're going to take the big leap forward, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. Whether it is players on expiring contracts like Kyle Okposo or Eric Johnson, I suspect that Kevin Adams will be a busy general manager this week. Elliotte.
Yeah.
I do wonder about Casey Middlestat, too. Again, I know I keep pounding that drum, but I still wonder about it.
I think the UFAs go. That's likely. I believe that Adams has indicated that the heavy surgery will likely come in the summer. Again, I could always be wrong. I could always be fooled. But I believe if he's going to change a bigger piece, I don't think he's against it. That's the one thing that people have indicated. He's not saying no, but what he is saying is you've got to give me a real good reason to do it now.
Right.
So that's where we are with him. I was talking to a few people who heard our take on Middlestat that you're getting close to bleep or get off the pot territory with him, and that's true. But they'd still have time to do it in the off season. And I think that's kind of what Adams, I've heard, has indicated. Give him a reason to do it now. And so I don't know if anyone's going to step up and do that.
The Detroit Red Wings, Elliotte, a team that made the big splash by signing Patrick Kane. I don't think either of us think for 1 second, though, that Steve Yzerman is going to remain quiet this week, knowing where the Red Wings are and knowing how much playoffs mean in Motown.
You know what someone said to me on Saturday that could lead to maximum carnage?
Ooh, what's that?
Well, Toronto is looking for a right shot defender. You know who's available?
Justin Hall.
Yep.
Yeah, that could be some maximum carnage right there.
First
they brought back Lyubushkin. Now they're going to bring back Justin Hall.
First of all, he got a rough ride here that he really didn't deserve.
Totally got a rough ride.
He played really hard for Toronto, and he's a better player than he got credit for. But depending on what Detroit was willing to do here, I kind of thought about it. It blew my mind, the possibility of it occurring. But Detroit is looking to clear up some space. People, my Gensel theory, I don't know. I mean, it fits, but people make a great point that it's not like Yzerman to give players like that 7-year extensions. Mm-hmm. I do think Detroit has been doing like they re-signed Rasmussen. I do think Detroit's been doing their work on Raymond and Seider. Like that shouldn't surprise anybody. It's not exactly a big scoop, but I do think Detroit's working at those so they know exactly what they're going to be dealing with. All of that said, a couple things for them. You have talked about D. I agree with you there. I have wondered about their left side. And I'll say this, as Alex Lyon saved their season, but I wonder if he's looking at a goalie. He's got 3.
Jeez,
but I wonder if there's anything he'd like better.
Do you want?
Well, somebody would go out, right?
I get that you're trying to improve, certainly, but my main thing there is a star leader defenseman, as I'm told.
Well, I know you said that. And I don't think you're wrong. And he wants to clear up a bit of the logjam on the line. There's no question. But I've kind of wondered if Yzerman would do that.
I like when you do max carnage theories. Okay, Florida Panthers. They don't have a lot to bargain away, and they don't have a lot of room to bring players in. But it's not like Bill Zito just to, keep his bat on his shoulder.
No, I think they're going to try. They have cap room.
Yeah, they do.
There were some reports on the weekend about Hannafin. I got mixed messaging on that. To me, it makes a lot of sense because if they're going to lose people on their blue line, he's a good ad. He's a good player. They have some things to clear up there. But I had other people who say to me they really like their blue line, and if they spend their money or their capital, they're going to add another forward. That's a team that's around on the better forwards. The Tarasenkos, the Gensels, those kinds of players, the Toffoli's if he's available. That's something that Florida's considered as well. So I'm mixed on the Hannafin. I absolutely believe the forward. I think the thing is, does Florida get any business done this week? I think they'd like to get Forsling done. That's been a battle. They'd like to get Forsling done. There are a lot of teams out there that really like Forsling, by the way.
Why not?
I've learned that. I've heard, I don't know how close it is, but I've heard there is a deal to get done with Reinhart that I don't know if it's again, I don't know how close it is.
That's got to be a whopper, Elliotte.
Well, it is, but I think it's going to be under Tkachuk. But when someone says to me there's a deal to be done, that means that whether it's close or not, both the team and the agent understand what everybody wants here, right? And they don't think it's impossible. So that's the word I've gotten on him. Montour, it seemed like it's a little bit slower, but I would say that it seems like it's been a little bit slower, but things can change fast, and he's such a huge part of them. To me, when I watched them last year, he was one of their emotional cornerstones, if not their emotional cornerstone. I think Florida would look kind of different without him in their lineup. Now, ultimately, that's the Panthers' choice to make. And if they don't keep him, somebody else will gladly sign him. But like, you love watching Florida. I love watching Florida. They played really well when both him and Ekblad were out, but they're even better with those guys back in, right? Like, they are a Stanley Cup contender. They're one of the best teams in the league, and they're really fun to watch. And to me, Montour is such an emotional leader on that team. And I don't know, it's like, I always wonder about fooling around with chemistry of good teams. I'd be worried about that with this one. I think they're built a lot on emotion in a good way.
And those two players really fit there. Like, first of all, Forsling's one of the great waiver claim stories in the NHL. Like, full stop. That is one of the best waiver claims in the league going away. But he fits there. Like, he found a home there. Like, Vancouver let him go in the Clendenning deal, and he was let go afterwards from the Chicago Blackhawks in that trade, and he's found a home in Florida. Like, that's where he's actualized as a legit, consistent, high-end player. And how many teams did Brandon Montour go through, right? Like, we'd been talking about him going back to, when he was drafted by the Anaheim Ducks, and he spent some years in San Diego, and then it didn't work out in Anaheim, and he went to Buffalo, and he didn't really find out who he was until he got to Florida. That's why I'm with you. Like, I'm sensitive. If I'm both those guys, man, this is where I can be the best version of myself. This is where I found a home. You try to find a way to make it work, no? It's so perfect for both of them there.
Yeah. Yeah, but one thing we've learned, hey, Bill Zito and his staff, they're not afraid to make tough decisions.
That is true. Someone, meanwhile, who really, I would make the argument, isn't being forced into any decisions right now, despite the fact that his team's not going to make the playoffs, is Kent Hughes, the Montreal Canadiens. He doesn't have to do anything, Elliotte, but does he do anything?
I think it just depends on if he gets something he likes. I've been told it's more likely than not the goaltending stuff goes in the summer. David Savard, there's been some interest. He has made it clear he wants to stay, and I think they're happy to have a veteran there. There's been some talk about one of their young D, Jordan Harris. Like, all of a sudden, they've got a lot of young defensemen. And Jordan Harris, man, like, I think a lot of teams would love to have that kind of young player on their roster. Why not? He's showed something. The thing about Savard, it's interesting. Pace of play. Like, that is one that I think some teams have looked at. Does he fit our pace? Everyone likes him. Everyone respects him. But does he fit the pace of play they play at? Okay,
so from one rebuilding team to another, from Montreal, we go to Ottawa. We've talked a lot about the Sens this year, and why not? With the sale and the GM situation and the coach situation and the booing and the losing and the speculation. What happens in Steve Staios' first trade deadline?
Well, I do think they would like to do something big. I just don't think it's the time yet. I think they're going to take a bigger look at this. I think it's more likely if they do major surgery, it's the summer. I do think Staios is willing to consider some bigger things. That's why I don't expect Chychrun to happen now, although I don't. Again, it's another one of those things you sit there and you say, I could look really bad in 5 days. But I really like... So I like the chances of Tarasenko moving. It's going to be his call. He has control. And the other thing, too, is I really believe that the new regime here, in their first trade deadline, I think they want to show that when they make a promise to a player, like giving a player control over the destination, they're immediately not in their first deadline going to be the kind of team that says, all right, we're going to try to tamper with that or pressure you on that. So I do believe that Tarasenko is going to have big say over this here, and they're not going to get into his grill about it. I've heard there have been a couple of teams, like everybody's always looking for D. I think there's a couple of teams looking at Brandstrom. I wouldn't want to put the percentages on that happening, but I think there have been some teams calling and saying, hey, what are you looking at? He's on our radar. I think Kubalik, I don't know. There hasn't been a lot of interest in him. He hasn't played well. But I do think they're going to take a bigger look at something this summer, and they're not averse to trying something bigger, though I just don't think it's the right time. I also think they are taking a long look at the goalies. They have to sort this out.
That to me is the most pressing issue. I'm with you on that one. So that needs to be job, as far as I'm concerned, job number one for Steve Staios in the offseason. Tampa, you talked earlier about Noah Hannafin. Isaac Howard seems to be the one trade chip they have, although I'm not so sure that Julien Brisebois wants to do anything with Isaac Howard, thank you very much, but wants to get some things done. We know they need help on the back end because of injuries. What do you see Tampa doing now?
I just think to me, the biggest question is, like if they're going after Hannafin, they're going after him to sign him. So I think Tampa's taking a bigger picture approach to this. It's just, look, you can never count them out. They've got a bunch of Hall of Famers on their team. But the wildest stat in the league this year is you look at Kucherov and all of the great talented teammates he has, he's leading the team in scoring by 40 points.
Yep.
And Vasilevsky, who's going to the Hall of Fame someday, like he looks human. So again, like we just talked about Florida, they make bold decisions. Tampa Bay makes bold decisions. The boldest decision here might be, this is not our year. Now, it's not in their DNA. It's not the way they think, but it might be the honest truth. And I'll tell you something else too, Jeff. Mm-hmm. If you're going out and you're getting Hannafin and you're signing him, what's the ripple effect?
Are you wondering about Steven Stamkos?
Well, I'm just wondering about a lot of things. You know their cap situation. It's tight. You're not.
That's why I wonder about Stamkos, because that's the big decision at the end of the year.
Like obviously that's the big one, but if you go out and sign him, like he was going to sign for 7.5 in Calgary, I'm sure they're going to say to him, if you're signing here for long term, it's not for that. But still, it's going to force you to make decisions. And Stamkos is the one we're all going to focus on, but I'm sure that's not the only one.
It's been the constant story of Tampa with all the success, though, right? That's nothing that we're surprised by.
Yeah, so that's the way I look at it. I think the boldest decision that the Lightning could make this year is we're not all in because it's not our year. But, again, how many times have we said, even though they lost last year to Toronto, how many times have we said betting against them is just stupid?
Yeah, I know, but I always got to catch myself too. It's not if they're coming off like a Stanley Cup final appearance or they're coming off, a conference final. They're coming off a first round loss against a team that lost in the second round. Now, mind you, to the team that went to the Stanley Cup final, but still, you always wonder, when the downturn starts and when you start walking down the shady side of the mountain. I don't know. I'm with you. Like I'm scared to say it because they're too talented and can burn you every time you say, oh yeah, they're washed. But still, It's going to happen one day. And one of those teams, Elliotte, and we'll finish up the podcast, and thanks to everyone who hung with us all the way to the end here. One of the teams we wondered, would they maybe keep the powder dry? And would they maybe say, this is not our year. We're not going to do anything here to jeopardize the future. I'm going to end with the Toronto Maple Leafs and Brad Treliving's decision. Now, it seems like, the defensemen are going down like Spinal Tap drummers. But what's facing Brad Treliving now?
I mean, look, first of all, they keep losing defensemen.
Yeah.
Timmins is coming back from the mono. Giordano gets hurt. They go out and get Lyubushkin. Lyubushkin gets hurt. I still think they're looking for a defender. Another one. Like I mentioned earlier in the pod, I heard about Dumba. Somebody downplayed him to me. I know they've looked at guys like Nick Jensen. I've heard they've looked at the Seattle guys, but as we talked about with the Kraken, they seem to really like their defensive core and don't really seem eager to break it up. They tried to get earlier this year. They tried to get Tanev and Zadorov together. They kicked the tires on Hanifin. I don't think that's happening. I think they've looked at Savard. I think they've looked at everybody. Like I wondered about Mario Ferraro last week, and someone said I wouldn't count on that one. But look, I think they're looking at depth forwards and they're looking at D. And Jensen I wondered about because he's got some term, but it's a bigger number. I'm not sure that they can do it. Yeah, I'm not sure that they can do it. Nick Robertson, they sent him to the minors, and that set off alarm bells for me because I know he wasn't happy earlier in the year, but apparently they sat him down and told him and said, look, this is to get us through the deadline. Only you and Nyes don't need waivers. We need the spot, and we're going to get you back up here pretty quick. And from what I understand, he understood that. So that's okay for now, but I think they're looking at defensemen, preferably right shot, and depth forwards, but they are going through, name a defenseman and they're looking at it. And plus I think they're going to keep the 3 goalies. So it's, I keep trying to figure out, it's like throw darts at the wall and figure out which defenseman they're going to end up with.
All right. A lot of intriguing teams there. And by the time we got to the end of this podcast, everything we just said is wrong or has changed.
Yes.
So hope you managed to listen to this one early enough in the week that it is still relevant. And we thank you for hanging in right till the end. Real quick, what's your week going to be like, Freach?
Oh, my God. This is a week where, I joke when I leave the house, it's good for my wife's boyfriend.
Are you gone for the whole week?
No. This is a week where he could be in the house with me and I wouldn't notice him.
It's Steph's vacation week. All right. Get some rest. Drink lots of water. Get a lot of protein. Get your exercise. Trade deadline's on the horizon. It's not just the one day. It's the entire week as well. Stay tuned to the social channels. Stay tuned to our website. Stay tuned to Hockey Central, Sportsnet Central, all our various radio and podcast and television properties. We will have you covered. Our trade deadline coverage, of course, on Friday. And then at some point, we'll do a podcast after it's all done. How about that? Thanks so much for listening. I really enjoyed being part of it again this year. That was a long podcast. Bless you for being with us all the way. And we'll talk to you again the next time we record. When is that? We're not sure. We'll see what happens on Friday.